It was a perfect night for a trip. The sky was clear, the moon shone brightly, and the stars illuminated the deserted road. Charlie and Marie, a young couple passionate about adventures, decided to hit the road to visit a small historic town a few hours away. The idea of traveling at night excited them, as the tranquility and mystery of nighttime roads always attracted them. With soft music playing on the radio, they talked and laughed, sharing stories and dreams. The city lights faded behind them, and darkness began to envelop the car. The road looked like a long black carpet, cutting through the vast fields around them. The headlights illuminated only a few meters ahead, creating a fascinating contrast between light and shadow. Everything seemed perfect until, without any warning, a thick fog began to form around the car. Charlie, with a steady hand on the wheel, slowed down, trying to stay calm. Marie looked at him, noticing the sudden tension in the air. Fog was dense, almost supernatural, and seemed to swallow the road. As they moved forward slowly, silence took over, interrupted only by the muffled sound of the tires on the asphalt. The radio began to hiss, losing its signal, and the peaceful atmosphere of the trip gave way to a sense of fear. They were alone, in the middle of nowhere, enveloped by a fog that seemed to have a life of its own. Dense fog made visibility nearly impossible. Charlie and Marie grew increasingly nervous, evident in their quick glances and restless hands. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the side of the road. Charlie slammed on the brakes, causing the car to skid a bit before stopping just short of the roadside. There, in the dim light created by the headlights, stood a solitary figure. It was a woman, dressed in a long white dress, fabric gently swaying in the night breeze. Her face was partially covered by her dark, disheveled hair. Her hunched posture conveyed a deep sadness. Marie hesitantly rolled down the window. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman didn't respond immediately. She slowly lifted her head, revealing empty eyes and a lost expression that sent chills down Marie's spine. With no other option and an instinct to help, Charlie and Marie decided to offer her a ride. The woman got into the car, her scent a strange mix of flowers and something indescribable, almost like the smell of the night itself. As she settled into the back seat, she finally whispered in an ethereal voice, "Thank you. I'm trying to get home." Silence took over the car again. Charlie and Marie exchanged wary glances in the rearview mirror, but decided to press on. The woman seemed harmless, though unsettling. As they continued down the fog-shrouded road, the sense of unease grew, and her presence in the back seat made every mile feel longer and darker. The road stretched ahead of them, a dark, seemingly endless strip cutting through the persistent veil of fog. Charlie drove in silence, tension visible in every muscle of his body. Marie stared out the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions and fears. The presence of the woman in the back seat, still unnamed and almost spectral, made the air inside the car heavy and oppressive. As they advanced, the landscape around them grew more desolate. There were no signs of life, no houses, no distant lights. Just the endless darkness and the fog dancing to the rhythm of the wind. The radio, now completely out of tune, emitted only static, amplifying the sense of isolation and mystery. Suddenly, the woman in the back seat began to murmur something. Her voice, low and trembling, sounded like a distant lament. Marie slowly turned, trying to understand what she was saying. "My house? It's near. Just there," the woman whispered, pointing to an indeterminate spot in the darkness. Her finger seemed to indicate a path only she could see. With a tight feeling in his chest, Charlie decided to follow the woman's direction. He turned the car onto a dirt road, barely distinguishable in the mist. The path was rough, jolting the car with every bump and stone. The sense that they were moving further away from safety was palpable, but something in the woman's voice compelled them to continue. As they progressed, the fog grew even thicker. The car's headlights could only penetrate a few meters ahead, creating a tunnel of light in the middle of the darkness. With each turn, the fear grew, and the sense that something terrible was about to happen hung in the air. Finally, through the fog, the silhouette of an old farmhouse emerged. Its contours were indistinct, but the structure looked long abandoned. The woman in the back seat let out a deep sigh, as if relieved to have finally arrived. "This is it," she said, with an unsettling certainty. Charlie stopped the car in front of the house, his heart pounding wildly. Marie held his hand, seeking comfort and courage. The woman opened the car door and stepped out, moving with an almost supernatural grace. She stopped at the entrance of the house, turning to face them one last time. "Thank you for bringing me back," she said with a sad smile that never reached her eyes. In the blink of an eye, the fog seemed to swallow her, and she disappeared as mysteriously as she had appeared. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. Charlie and Marie sat in the car, stunned and incredulous. The house in front of them, shrouded in fog, seemed even more sinister now that they were alone again. Charlie turned off the engine, and the sound of the car died, leaving only the faint whisper of the wind and the rustling of leaves. "We should leave," Marie finally said, breaking the silence with a trembling voice. Charlie nodded. Something in the atmosphere made him hesitate. There was a feeling of being watched. An invisible presence permeated the air. He started the car again and maneuvered to leave, but as they began to pull away, the engine sputtered and died. Charlie tried to restart it several times, but the car remained stubbornly still, as if something was holding it in place. "This can't be happening," Charlie muttered, trying to stay calm. Marie looked around, her eyes wide with fear. "What are we going to do? We can't stay here," she said, her voice shaking. Charlie reached for his phone, but there was no signal. They were isolated, trapped in that strange and frightening place. Suddenly, a faint light flickered inside the house. It was as if someone had lit a candle or a lantern. "Did you see that?" Marie asked, her voice almost a whisper. Charlie stared at the house, trying to determine if his eyes were deceiving him. The light flickered again, this time brighter, then vanished. "We need to check it out," Charlie said, though the idea filled him with dread. They got out of the car, their flashlights illuminating the path. The fog seemed thicker around the house, and each step they took echoed like thunder in the night silence. As they approached the entrance, the door creaked and slowly opened, as if inviting them in. Charlie hesitated, but Marie held his hand firmly, showing unexpected courage. "Let's get this over with," she said, and together they crossed the threshold. The interior of the house mirrored its exterior, old, dusty, filled with cobwebs. The smell of mold and decay was strong, and the air felt colder inside. The light they had seen was no longer visible. The feeling of being watched was intense. "Is anyone here?" Charlie called out, his voice echoing through the empty hallways. No response. They walked through the foyer, their flashlights illuminating abandoned, ancient furniture. In one corner, a rocking chair moved slowly, as if someone had just stood up from it. As they ventured deeper, they found an old portrait hanging on the wall. It was the image of a young woman in a white dress, with a sad and familiar expression. "It's her," Marie whispered, recognizing the woman they had picked up on the road. But how is this possible? Before they could ponder further, a loud noise came from upstairs, as if something heavy had been knocked over. Charlie's heart raced, and he looked at Marie, who was equally terrified. "Let's get out of here," he said, pulling her toward the exit. But as they turned, the door slammed shut with a bang, and the sound of heavy footsteps began descending the stairs. They were trapped, and the sense of impending danger was overwhelming. With each step, the sounds drew nearer. Charlie and Marie braced themselves to face whatever was coming, feeling as though they were on the brink of a confrontation with the unknown. The footsteps echoed through the house, growing closer, resonating like a war drum in the oppressive silence. Charlie and Marie exchanged panicked glances. They had nowhere to run. The only exit was blocked, and it felt as if the house itself wanted to keep them there, prisoners in a nightmare. Suddenly, a figure descended the stairs. It was not the same woman they had picked up on the road. This one had a far more disturbing appearance. Her skin was waxy pale, her eyes sunken and lifeless, and her dress was stained with blood and torn as if she had emerged from a grave. She floated rather than walked, moving with a supernatural grace that defied logic. Marie clutched Charlie's arm tightly, her body trembling with fear. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Charlie had no answer. His eyes were fixed on the apparition, terror paralyzing every fiber of his being. The ghostly woman stopped at the bottom of the stairs, empty eyes locked onto Charlie and Marie. For a moment that felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, she raised a skeletal hand and pointed to a dark corridor on her right. The message was clear. They were to follow that path. With no other option, Charlie and Marie began to walk slowly down the indicated corridor. The wooden floorboards creaked under their feet, each step a sinister reminder of their desperate situation. The corridor seemed to stretch on infinitely. The walls lined with old portraits that seemed to watch them with accusing eyes. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the corridor. Charlie hesitated, his hand hovering over the rusted doorknob. Marie stood beside him, her breath quick and uneven. "We have to do this," he said, trying to sound brave. Charlie turned the doorknob, and the door opened with a long, mournful creak. The room beyond was small and dark, lit only by a faint light from a dust-covered window. In the center of the room was an old bed. On it lay the body of a woman. She was lying on her back, her face turned toward the ceiling. Charlie and Marie cautiously approached, and as they got closer, they realized it was the same woman from the portrait and the road. But now she seemed at peace, eyes closed as if she were sleeping. A sense of relief and sadness washed over them. They didn't know what had happened or why they were there, but somehow they felt they had fulfilled an important role. Suddenly, the ghostly figure appeared again, this time beside the bed. She looked at Charlie and Marie with an expression that somehow seemed grateful. Before they could react, the mist began to dissipate, and the figure vanished into the air like a breath of wind. The house seemed to change as well, the air becoming less oppressive and the silence less threatening. It was as if a weight had been lifted, and the darkness was no longer so overwhelming. Charlie and Marie, still stunned, turned to leave the room. When they reached the hallway, the front door was open, and the road ahead was visible again. They ran to the car, the engine starting without any problems this time. Without looking back, they drove away quickly, their hearts still pounding, but with the feeling that they had survived something much larger than they could comprehend. As they sped away, the old house grew smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror, until it completely disappeared into the distance. Charlie and Marie knew that that night would be etched in their memories forever. Reminder of the encounter with the unknown changed their lives. As Charlie and Marie drove down the dirt road, their minds were still trapped in the supernatural events of the house. The car jolted forward, and the mist that had seemed to dissipate suddenly thickened again, enveloping the vehicle like a spectral shroud. The sound of the tires crunching on the gravel was the only thing breaking the oppressive silence. The eerie atmosphere intensified. Every shadow seemed to come alive as they moved through the dense fog. The road ahead was barely visible, but Charlie kept his grip steady on the wheel, determined to get them as far away from that house as possible. Out of nowhere, the fog began to lift once more, this time for good. The road became clear, and the landscape around them slowly transformed back into the familiar countryside. The tension in the car eased, and they both took deep breaths, trying to shake off the remnants of fear. Charlie glanced at Marie, who was staring out the window, her eyes wide with lingering shock. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Marie nodded slowly. "I think so. But what just happened? It felt like a dream." "A nightmare," Charlie corrected, though a faint smile touched his lips. "But it's over now." They drove in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. The night sky was still clear, and the stars twinkled above them, a stark contrast to the darkness they had just escaped. They knew that what they had experienced was real, but the details already seemed to blur, like a fading memory. As dawn approached, they finally reached the small town they had originally set out for. The streets were quiet, and the first light of day cast a soft glow over the historic building. Charlie parked the car, and they sat there for a moment, taking in the peaceful surroundings. Marie turned to Charlie, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think she found peace?" Charlie nodded. "I think so, and maybe we helped her find it." With a final glance at each other, they got out of the car and walked hand in hand into the town, ready to face whatever came next. The events of the night had changed them, but they felt stronger for it, united by the shared experience of the unknown and the belief that they had made a difference. even in the most mysterious of ways. "We need to get out of here as fast as we can," said Charlie, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. Marie, eyes fixed on the road ahead, nodded silently, trying to steady her rapid breathing. As the car moved down the deserted road, the tension in the air started to lessen. Charlie and Marie knew something was still very wrong. A feeling of being watched lingered, and the momentary calm seemed like a fragile illusion. The night was far from over. As they continued, a new sensation enveloped them, an invisible, mysterious presence. Felt as if the road itself had a consciousness, observing, waiting. And somewhere in the darkness, something or someone was lurking, ready to reveal the true secret, that cursed road. Driving further into the desolate night, Charlie and Marie felt as though they were being drawn into an unforgiving darkness. The atmosphere around them felt heavy, and the persistent fog seemed alive, wrapping the car in a cold, suffocating embrace. Every turn in the road unveiled more darkness and mystery. The vegetation along the way appeared denser and more oppressive, and the car's headlights barely penetrated the thick gloom ahead. The sensation of being watched only grew stronger with each passing minute. Suddenly, a faint greenish glow appeared in the distance. It was a dim light, like an old lamp swaying gently in the wind. Charlie wondered aloud, what could that be? Breath quickening. They followed the light to an old structure, a small house that looked abandoned for decades. Its wooden walls were covered in moss and vines, and the dim light came from a broken window where a solitary candle burned. It was the same house from before. How could that be possible? The door was now ajar, creaking softly with the breeze. As they regained their bearings, flashlight beam illuminated the dark and dusty interior of the house. The smell of mold and dampness was strong, and the floor was littered with dry leaves and cobwebs. In the center of the room, there was a table covered with a collection of old, yellowed objects. On it, an open diary lay, its pages yellowed and worn. The interior of the house felt different this time. Charlie and Marie approached, and Charlie began to read the entries with a trembling voice. In recent years, the road has become increasingly cursed. Those who venture in never return whole. There is an ancient pact made generations ago to protect a terrible secret buried deep in the forest. Curse feeds on fear and confusion, keeping the curious away from the truth. The diary went on to describe the story of a family who had built the house and placed a curse on the road, protect hidden treasure. According to the account, the road had been cursed to guard an ancient artifact, the power to control supernatural forces. As Charlie read, a growing murmur began to fill the space around them. It was as if the environment itself was reacting to the discovery. Walls of the house seemed to vibrate, and the shadows moved unsettlingly. Marie glanced through the broken window and saw a figure approaching, shrouded in fog and shadows. "Charlie, look," she exclaimed, her heart racing. The figure moved slowly, its shape distorted and indistinct. It was as if the curse itself was manifesting before them. The murmurs grew louder, and the candlelight began to flicker. Charlie and Marie exchanged worried glances, knowing they needed to act quickly. The diary mentioned a ritual in which the one responsible for the pact had to kill all the family members to serve as offering. And each year on the same date, more souls had to be sacrificed to maintain the pact. It also hinted at what needed to be done to break the curse, but the details were incomplete, as if they hadn't been fully revealed. Desperate, they began to search the house for any clues that could help them understand the ritual and find a way out. They found an old altar at the back of the room, covered with strange symbols and objects. On the altar was a wooden box with a lock, which Charlie married Jed to open after some effort. Inside, there was an ancient medallion with a symbol. "Maybe this is the key," Charlie said, holding the medallion firmly. The figure outside was now almost at the door, and the sense of imminent danger was palpable. With the medallion in hand, they desperately tried to find a way to break the pact. The candlelight flickered again, and a cold wind swept through the cabin. The figure outside seemed to dissolve into the fog, and the murmurs began to fade. It was as if the house itself was helping to lift the curse. The oppressive feeling started to lift. The cabin seemed brighter, and the fog outside began to clear slowly. Charlie and Marie felt a profound relief, as if the pressure on them was finally being lifted. Unbeknownst to them, they had now become part of the house, pact, and the ritual. They left the cabin and returned to the car. The road ahead appeared less threatening, and the feeling of being watched diminished with every mile they traveled. Then they saw the bodies hanging, already decayed. There were two women, the same ones seen earlier, a child still holding a tattered, mud-covered doll, and a young couple, them, lying on the ground covered in blood and dust. They had faced the terror and uncovered the hidden truth of the cursed road, but the experience had left them marked and forever bound. Curse and its secrets always be there, waiting for those who dared to challenge the unknown again. Confused and terrified, they ran towards the road. As it stretched out before them, they began to notice that signs of life were becoming increasingly scarce. The trees around them seemed to lean toward the path, as if watching them. The moon, previously hidden, now appeared closer, its cold, relentless light casting an eerie glow on the road. Then something strange happened. Hooded figures began to emerge from among the trees, their indistinct silhouettes moving slowly toward the road. "Charlie, look!" Marie screamed, panic evident in her voice. Figures were approaching, the moonlight reflecting unsettlingly off their dark hoods. The sound of soft, rhythmic footsteps began to fill the air. The hooded figures now encircled them, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hoods. Charlie and Marie could feel their eyes on them, assessing them with a menacing presence. In an almost ritualistic motion, the figures began to chant in an ancient, incomprehensible language. The sound was hypnotic and disturbing, like a mournful hymn that seemed to penetrate their very souls. Marie tried to escape, but she was frozen, as if compelled to participate in the eerie ceremony. Suddenly, one of the figures stepped forward, holding an old wooden box. It was opened slowly, revealing a warm, reddish glow emanating from within. Figures began to chant louder, and the glow from the box intensified, bathing everything in a sinister red light. Charlie and Marie shielded their eyes with their hands. The light seemed to pierce through their eyelids, burning their retinas with an intense heat. A deafening noise filled the space, as if the road itself was screaming in agony. Then, abruptly, silence fell. The red light vanished, and the hooded figures disappeared. Charlie and Marie, still dazed, looked around to find themselves back on the deserted dirt road. But something was terribly wrong. The road seemed to shift before their eyes, twisting into an endless maze. They had returned to the beginning of the cursed road, and the feeling of being deceived by some hidden force was overwhelming. The hooded figures had brought them back. The curse never ends. It adapts, and you are always back, restarted. Charlie and Marie exchanged terrified glances. The road before them had transformed into an unending nightmare, a cycle of terror that would trap them forever. As they walked down the seemingly endless road, a new truth settled in. They had become part of the curse, condemned to remain there eternally. You've made it this far. You're truly a fan of stories that defy logic and explore the boundaries of the supernatural. We hope the journey down the cursed road has rattled your nerves and left you craving more. If you enjoy a good horror story and want to dive into more tales that challenge the unknown, subscribe to our channel. Don't miss the chance to follow our chilling narratives and uncover the mysteries that haunt us. Your next nightmare is just a click away. Subscribe and get ready for a never-ending journey into the heart of fear.